Here we go. Today's daf. Good to be back. Be'ez Hashem. Today's daf is daf Memches, 48 in Sanhedrin. And we're going to start from after the first third of Memzayin Amid Beis, 47b, from the Gemara. So this is basically a discussion about grave sites. So here's a fascinating Gemara to begin our learning tonight. Okay. It starts from Kivrei Derav. The line begins the Efshar. Okay, so Kivrei Derav. The Gemara tells us that the burial where Rav was buried, they used it like have a shaklamine. It sounds like Svardish. Have a shaklamine. The people would come there to his where he's buried, and they would take afra, they would take dirt. Leishta basyom. If you had a fever that was the first day, and maybe it was a fever that you're going to get a fever, you take some of his dirt and rub it on your body, I guess, and you were healed. So this was a problem because how could you go to somebody's gravesite and take some of the earth and rub it on you? Once it's used as a burial spot, right? So one would think that it becomes osir bahanoah. You're not allowed to benefit from it. Let's say you would discover, let's say the shrouds or the bone of a corpse. Of course, you can't benefit from it, but even the shrouds, you can't benefit from it. So the question they asked was, how were the people going to Rav's burial place and taking some dirt because to try to heal themselves because they were sick? How did they were allowed to do that? Also, Amr Leilu Shmuel. So they came and told this whole thing to Shmuel. Amalahu, he said to them, Yo is Avdim. They're doing okay because the dirt in Rav's burial grave, in Rav's grave, is not osir because karka oilamhu. It's really it's basic land of the world, and you can never aser karka oilam. But karka oilam ain't in the asaris. One cannot aser karka oilam. In other words, you can't say that this, let's say you have a mountain, and I'm going to decide that I'm going to make this mountain an Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is also Bahana. So I can't answer something that's part of planet Earth. I can make a person can make an Avodah Zarah out of anything, but Karka Olam, the land, one cannot make it Asr Bahana. Land is land. So therefore, the land that they used to bury Rav, that would never became Asr Bahan Noah. And because of that, therefore, people were allowed to come to his burial site and take some of the dirt and heal themselves with. Now, don't say this Gemara to some, maybe to some of Hasidim of a big Rebbe. They may do the same idea. Anyway, the Ksiv, how do you know? How do you know that a burial site is compared to Avodah Zarah? The Ksiv Pasuk says, "Vayashlech esafara al kevra b'nei aham." They throw their dirt, the dirt of the Avodah Zarah, on the grave site. Makash kevra b'nei ha'am l'Avodah Zarah. So there's a pasuk that juxtaposes the burial, the grave, to an avodah zarah. Ma avodah zarah b'mechubar loy mitasra. Just like once something is connected to the ground, in other words, the real estate of planet Earth can never become an avodah zarah. The ksiv, like I said, like I told you the pasuk, ashatem yoshim oisim es Elohehem al haharim aramim. The Torah tells us that you have to get rid of the avodah zarahs that are on their high mountains. When you get to Israel and take over the country, you have to get rid of their gods that are on the top mountains, on the top of the mountains. Al heharim aleheim. What's on top of the mountain? Those are idols. V'loy heharim eloheim. But the mountain itself can never become an idol. So hachinami. So you can say by any burial, any grave, b'mechuber, something that was connected, something that was part of the ground, loy mitzar, does not become prohibited. Does not become asar bahanoah. And because of that, therefore, people were allowed to take from Rav's grave and use it as their dirt to heal themselves. So the Gemara asks, Meisvei, let me ask you a question. If someone digs up a grave, he wants to use it to bury his father or anybody. He never used it for his father. He buried his father in another place. So lo yikava by ilamis. You can never bury with that at all, because since it was designated to be for his father, so it became Asr Bahana. So it became Asr Bahana, like as if as if your father was buried in there. So we see that the ground could become Asr Bahana. And says the Gemara, Hacha Babayaskinin, of there we're talking about Bekever Binyan. It was an above ground grave. So in order to build an above ground grave, let's say you build a house. So you had to take stones and then build it all around, I guess, the like a little mini house around the dead body because it was not easy in some places to dig, right? If you don't have a tractor that can make it dig, they would bury above ground. So if you're burying above ground, that type of kever, that type of built structure will become usher, even if later you cemented it and connected to the ground. Since at the time that you were building it, it was separate pieces, it becomes usher, like something that's detached from the ground. But something that was originally part of the ground can never become usher. So if you go into, let's say, a cave and you dig a hole in the wall and you bury somebody there, the area, the dirt around the where you buried the person is permitted because that never becomes asr bahana. Tashma, come in here. Kever chodosh, if you have a brand new kever, muta bahana. You're allowed. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. Tashma, come in here. Kever Chodesh Mutar Bahana, a brand new grave, you're allowed to benefit from it. You're allowed to, you use it for yourself or hittle by nafel. But if you dropped a a little baby, a stillborn in there, Asa Bahana. So we see that's it's a brand new grave, and 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 it becomes Asa Bahana because there's somebody buried in there. And says the Gemara, Hachanami bekever binyan. That Bryce is talking about a structured kever, an above ground burial site. But and truth be told, that if you bury in the ground, it can never become asar. Tashma, come in here. Nimtza ata oime sholosh kavaris hay. I'll give you there are three halachas by three different types of burials. Keva nimtza, keva yedua, keva mazik rabba. There are three types of graves. We'll explain each one of them. Keva nimtza. If you find a grave you never gave permission in your field, and you find all of a sudden you're digging in your field and you find a grave there, mutar lahanoi. So you're allowed to remove the remains of the body and bury it somewhere else. And once you removed it, Mekai mitar mutabana. The places remains tar. You're allowed to benefit from it because you gave no permissions for somebody to bury in your backyard. Kever how you do it, but if you knew that there was a grave that was there, and yet one time you gave permission for somebody to bury in your backyard, also lafanaisa, then you can't remove the dead body from there. Pino, if you remove it, mikoimai tame v'asabana. The place where the body was buried, that area is tame, and it's asabana. Here you get your question. Why if the body is not there anymore, why can't I enjoy the ground? It must be that the ground became asabana despite being karka oila. And then the Brisa says, Kever Amazikas Rabin. Let's say you have a kever buried in the middle of the street and it's causing everybody to become Tame. Mutalafanoisa, you're allowed to remove it. Pinoho, the Koimetar, Vasabana. The place where you buried it is Asabana, but is mutter is tar, Vasabana, and that becomes Asabahana. You're still not allowed to take, the ground from it. So we see that despite everything, you could answer something that's connected to the grounds. Answers the Gemara, same teretz. Hachanami, here we're discussing Bekever Binyan. You made an above ground structure for a burial, for a grave, so therefore an above ground grave, therefore it becomes Asr Bahana. It becomes Asr Bahana. But if you bury in the ground, then it's Mutter Bahana. The keva hanimtza, says the Gemara. The Gemara asks one like a open parentheses questions. The keva hanimtza. Let's say you find a grave on your property. Mutalaf noisi. You're allowed to remove the contents. Dilma meis mitzvah. Maybe somebody died suddenly, and umeis mitzvah kana. And wherever somebody dies and there's no one to bury it, that place becomes his. So therefore, it's like it's not even yours anymore. So how are you allowed to remove it? And says the Gemara, you can't assume that somebody just died on your property. Shana makes mitzvah the kol isla. Everybody knows when somebody dies suddenly and there's nobody to bury it, you bury it in that place. Everybody would know about it. So how did this guy end up in your lot? Somebody, a family, was too cheap to buy a plot in the cemetery, so they buried it in your backyard. So that's not called a mace mitzvah, and therefore you're allowed to remove it. Bottom line is what the Gemara just said, just got through saying, and we're going on to a new sugya. Gemara got through saying that the place where you bury somebody and you put the dirt on, presumably you're allowed to take some of that dirt. Presumably you're allowed to take some of that dirt and use it. It doesn't become aser bahana. It's only if you build an above ground structure, an above ground burial, that's when the kever, the grave, becomes aser bahana. Now comes the new Gemara. Itmar we learned ha'orig beged lemes. Someone who wove a piece of a suit, let's say, for a mace to be used as tachrichim, shrouds. He wove together shrouds. Then he said, I'm going to use this for so and so's dead body. Now, let's say somebody died and they were so poor that they didn't have burial shrouds. So a guy quickly wove a whole little cloth and he says at the end, I'm going to use this as the burial shrouds for this dead person. But he didn't actually wrap the dead body in there. Abaye is ama aser, v'rava ama mut. Abaye says that as soon as you said that, the whole shrouds becomes aser, even if you did not wrap the mace with it. V'rava ama muta. Rava says it's permitted. So Gemara says like this: Abaya ama aser. Abaya says it's aser hasmana. The fact that you dedicated it to be used as a burial shrouds, milsi. That is as if you actually wrap the body in it, and therefore it becomes aser bahana. You're not allowed to benefit from it. Rava ama Rava says muta baha. He says it's muta. As long as you didn't wrap the body with it, hasmana lav milsi. The fact that you dedicated it, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. Only if it's actually used on the dead body, it becomes asa de bahana. So Gemara says, "My time of Abaya." What is the reason of Abaya? Goma sham sham egla rufa. He has a gzeira shava. It says "Vatomash sham Miriam," and it says the word sham by egla rufa. Mag egla rufa bahazmona mitasra. As soon as you bring that little calf, as you're going to use it as the calf that you're going to knock its head off, it becomes aser, right? Even if you didn't knock its head off, the fact that you're bringing it to Nachal Esan, it becomes aser. Hainami, also burial shrouds, bahazmona, just by dedicating it for a burial shrouds, mitasra, it becomes aser. Rava says, sham sham avodah zara. We learn Gzeir Shava Sham Sham from Avodah Zara that Ma Avodah Zara Bazmona Loy Mitasra. With dedicating it, it does not become Asr. If someone says this house should be an Avodah Zara, this ox should be an Avodah Zara, there's nothing wrong. You could enjoy the ox just by dedicating it without service to it. It doesn't make it Asr. So also by burial shrouds, Bahazmana, just by dedicating it that you're going to use this cloth for a burial shrouds, lo mitasra, it doesn't become aser. Says the Gemara, Rava, my tamil gomel me egla rufa. Why didn't Rava learn from egla rufa that as soon as you dedicate it, as soon as you dedicate it, it should become aser? Amalach, he says, the reason why I have a choice, we go to Mem Chesam and Aleph. I have a choice to learn from egla rufa that has mona milsa, or I could learn from Avodah Zarah, Hasmona Lav Milsa. I'd rather learn it from Avodah Zarah because Mishamshim Gamarinin. An accessory to an accessory, we learn. Here, it's burial shrouds is an accessory to a dead body. If someone says a bottle of wine that I'm going to pour over for an Avodah Zarah, or an animal that I'm going to slaughter for the Avodah Zarah, so that's an accessory to the idol. So that's where we learn Hasmona Lav Milsi. They're both similar. Lapuke egla rufa dihi gufo kadosha. Egla rufa itself is a holy item, and therefore, as soon as you dedicate it, then if of course it becomes like kachim, it becomes lahavda like kachim, and it becomes also right away. So there, a reg on there will say Hazmona Milsa. Rabaya chose to learn everything from Agla Rufa, not from Avodah Zarah. My time Avodah Zarah. Why didn't he learn the idea of burial shrouds from Avodah Zarah? Amalach, he will tell you, midi de urche midi de urche gamrina, because the fact is that burial shrouds is something that comes up often, and Egla Rufa is also comes up doesn't come up often, but the fact is it's a mitzvah, and therefore it makes sense. This is a mitzvah to make burial shrouds. It's a mitzvah to do Egla Rufa. Just like Egla Rufa, just by dedicating it, it becomes Asr Bahana. So also by burial shrouds, as soon as you dedicate it, it becomes Asr Bahana. La puke avoid zora the lav urche. Avoid zora, we don't. There's a reason why we don't want it to become Asr Bahana right away. Just by dedicating this out for another that you're going to slaughter for avoid zora, because we're hoping that you're not going to do the avodah zarah. Even a ben noya, even a goy is not supposed to do avodah zarah, and we're hoping that you're going to retract. And because of that, therefore, just by dedicating it, we're not going to make it aser bahano. So again, we have a machlokes. Guy wove a cloth, and he said, "I'm going to use this now to as a burial shroud." Just by saying it, it becomes aser. That's so says Abaya. Rava says it does not become us until you actually wrap the body with it. Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. Kipa, shehum tame medrash, satel sefer Torah min medrash, avatome maga medrash. The bottom line is the halacha is that a woman who has, let's say, a head covering that she used to sleep with. She used it as a pillow. So then it could become tummy medrash. But let's say she decides to, instead of using it for a sleep pillow, she's gonna from now on, just use it to wrap a sefer Torah with. So because of that, just by saying that she's going to use it to wrap a sefer Torah, it loses its status of getting this tummy medrash, this sleeping type of tuma that could become tummy if she was a nida. So we see that just by dedicating the Satei L'Sefer, just by dedicating that you're going to use it for a Sefer Torah, Torah min medrash, it becomes now a head covering that's never going to be used as something that you sleep on. So this is a question. So we see Hazmana Milsahi, that's like Abaya. So the Gemara says, Amen Satu Krachta, you actually dedicated it to be used for a Sefer Torah, and you wrapped the Sefer Torah in it. So the Gemara asks this question, why do I have to dedicate it with my mouth and wrap a Sefer Torah? Why can't I just wrap a Sefer Torah with it and that's enough? Why does the Brisa say and you wrapped it with a Sefer Torah? And says the Gemara, because Rav Chizda is taught, Rav Chizda doesn't hold of Abaya. So therefore, Hasmona is Lav Milsa. He holds like Rava. But just by wrapping something without dedicating it, it won't become Asa too. Because maybe you're doing it temporarily. So Rava, who says Hasmana Lav Milsa, will require you to do Hasmana plus a Maisa in order to dedicate something. The Amar Rav Chizda says, Hi Sudura, if you have a kerchief, the Azmin Lamein Meitza by Tefillin, you're going to wrap Tefillin with it. You have like a handkerchief, you're going to use it to wrap your Tefillin. V'tzar bei Tefillin, if you wrap your Tefillin in it, Asa Lameitza bei Peshite. Asa Lameitza bei Peshite. Azmane, also lemeitza bei pshita. You're not allowed to use it for other things. So the Gemara says like this: Azmane v'loitzar. If you just wrapped it, right? Here you did both. In other words, you were mazmin it. You said verbally you're going to use it for your tefillin, and you actually wrapped your tefillin in it. So then you're not allowed to use it for anything mundane. You could only use that handkerchief for tefillin. But Azmane, if you verbally said that you're going to use it for tefillin, v'loy tzarbe, but you didn't wrap a tefillin, or tzarbe v'loy Azmane, or you wrapped the tefillin in it, but you didn't verbally say you're going to use it for tefillin, shari lebeitze beipshita, then you could use it for anything. Because just because you wrapped your tefillin once with it doesn't make it a tefillin wrap, because maybe you did it temporarily. So therefore, according to Rav Chizda, you're going to have to actually do both. Two things. Number one, you're going to have to verbally say you're going to use this handkerchief for your tefillin, and also you have to wrap your tefillin in it. So that's the way Rav Chizda, Rav Chizda who goes with the opinion of Rava. Well, Abaya de Oma has monamilsi, the Abaya who says that you have to verbally say something and then it becomes aser. Azmane afgad de sarbe. If you if you if you dedicate something, even if you didn't wrap it, it becomes aser. But Abaye would agree, Tsarbe, if you just wrap it with your tefillin in it, but you did not verbally say you want to use it tefillin, asmini in. Only if you dedicate it verbally, yes, loy asmini loy. Then it if you didn't dedicate it, it's not going to become aser. So we learned a brand new idea that although Abaya holds verbally without action makes something usher, but action without verbal will not make it usher. Because maybe you wrapped it temporarily, but maybe you don't want to dedicate it. But just verbally dedicating the power of your mouth can dedicate something to make it used only for holy items. So again, if so, it's no proof from there either way. Hazmana milsa, hazmana loy milsa. Next, Toshma, we'll come in here. Nefesh shibano l'shem chai muta bahano. If you build a monument, let's say a grave monument that you're using to slap over a grave. If you built it for a live person, mutabano, you can benefit from it. If you just said, I'm going to add one row, and I'm going to make this that when somebody dies, this will be like a little add a few bricks on it, and Memela, when somebody dies, then I'm going to use this monument for somebody who's a dead person. Asabano, it's asabano, even before the person died. So we see from there that just dedicating something makes something asar. And says the Gemara, dirmon mace, that you actually used it for as a covering for a dead person. In other words, you did an action. You verbally designated it, and you actually used it for a dead person. Says Gemara, what do I need to add something to that monument to make it usher? The fact that I'm using it over a dead body, Kiloy Hoysef Nami, if you didn't even add to it, it should become Asa Bahana. And says the Gemara, like Tzika Afagav de Panya, even though you remove the mace from there, let's say you use it as a monument, and then you remove the mace, that will always remain Asr only because you verbally dedicate it as part of a dead person. If you didn't verbally dedicate it and put it over the grave site, so then it becomes Asr as long as there's a grave underneath. But if Asr Bahana, but if you remove the dead body, then it would be Mutter Bahana. But the fact that you dedicated it, it will always remain Asr. If you know which stones you added to that monument, you just take off those extra stones, and next the rest of the monument becomes mutter. Again, once after you remove the dead body that's underneath the grave. New brisa tashma choitziv kever la'avav v'halachol kvar bekever achra harei zeh lo yikaver b'yalam is if you make a grave for your father and then you buried him in somewhere else, you're not allowed to use that grave site for anybody. So we see that you just dedicated it, but you never actually buried your father there. The whole kever becomes aser. So we see hasmona milsa, and it says Gemara hasam shim kvoid aviv. That becomes aser because you're showing honor to your father because that's why it becomes asa. You don't want to say that you designated something for your father. It's not because it's dedicated as a grave. Since you dedicated for your father, it remains asa.
But there's so many cases where people buy graves. I mean, to this day, constantly they live in New York, then they move to Florida, they die in Florida, somebody buys a grave for them in Florida, but yet it was dedicated for them in New York, and then they just sell the graves. I mean,
Right.
it's very common.
I think but here it says hachoitziv. You actually dug the grave for your father.
Oh,
So
not just dedicating a spot.
right, but
You don't.
that's the verbal dedication. The buying the spot is not even called a dedication. Not a called a dedication. You see, what's a dedication? A guy wove the suit, and then he says after the suit, he picks it up and says, "I'm going to use this for the so and so, Mister So and so, the dead person." So even before you wrap the dead person, that dedication is enough. But buying a piece of land, saying that you're going to, that may not even be a dedication. But
Okay.
here, you actually, what makes it a dedication, you actually dug the grave. But anyway, according to Rava, that wouldn't make only it only becomes asabana if you drop your father in there. But if you didn't, then it shouldn't be asabana. So the Gemara says the reason why is because of the honor of your father. we go the extra mile. It's not for the respect of your father. Really, it's not nothing to do with dedication. Hachinam mistavrid the Tani Seifa b'shimim l'il oima af hachoitzev avana la'aviv v'hol kvar b'machnas l'el yikav b'hen oilames. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says even if you went to a mountain and just took stones out of the mountain and said, "Oh, I'm going to use this to bury my father with," those stones become awesome. Now, certainly that's not a dedication. Iyama bishlam Hashem kavod aviv. If the whole thing is because of the honor of your father, shaper, that makes sense. You pulled stones out of a mountain, and you said you're going to use it for your father, for the honor of your father. That makes it usher. Eliyama bishum hasmona. It's because you're using it for a dead body. But tavid lariga miyikal man the amar. Nobody would hold that like what you said, Steve. Nobody should hold that if you buy a piece of land, that's not called hasmona because you didn't do anything. Or you buy yarns and start spinning it, but you didn't make the suit yet. That's not called hasmona, even though you're saying that I'm going to eventually make a suit and then use it for burial shrouds. The only time it becomes usher is you actually make the burial shrouds, make the burial shrouds. So that's why it's not a machlekes. I'm going to skip down to the end and then we'll stop because I want to get to the point of the Gemara. So we go to Amud Beis. I'm going to go to a little bit of Amud Beis. The Gemara goes back and forth, and then the Gemara finally says, "Toshma, come in here," and we're going to stop in 1.5 minutes. Basically, we have a bias saying that if you make a suit and then you say I'm going to use it for the dead person, it's usher. Rava says that as long as you didn't wrap the dead person in it, it doesn't become usher. So Tashma, come in here. Listen to this brisa. Amal umen, you said to an old worker, Asayli tikshel sefer not tikshel tefillin. You said to a worker, I want you to make me a wrap for a sefer Torah or a tefillin bottle, right? Ad shaloi nishtamish behen kodesh, mutar lishtamish behen choil. Until you actually use it to put tefillin in there, even though you said I'm making this, it has your name on it, right? And you say tefillin on it. As long as you didn't put tefillin in it, you could use it to put your medications in there or money in there. Nishtamish behem kodesh, but once you started using it for your tefillin, also nishtamish behem choil. You're not allowed to use it for mundane items. So what you see from there is not like a buyer, because you told the worker, I want this pouch to be for my tefillin, and yet as long as you didn't use it for your tefillin, it doesn't become aser. So same thing, if you dedicate a suit for a dead person, that would not make it aser until you wrap it. So this brisa clearly is like Rava. So Abai is going to say, I hold like Rab Shimon ben Gamliel because Tanoi, it's a machlokes Tanoim. The Tanya we learned in the brisa, tzipa zav v'shtolein or shebehema tmeya psules. Or behema tahara ksheris afa pashlei idam lishma. We know that a tefillin, the bottom of the tefillin, if you make it out of gold or you use an unclean animal, it's possible. But if you use a clean from the hide of a clean animal, even though when you made the hide of the clean animal, you didn't say I'm going to use it for my tefillin. That's kosher because the Tanakama holds you don't need to dedicate something, like Rava said. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, "Af or behema tahara psulis." Even if it's a kosher animal and you made a batim for it, you have to say that I'm using it for tefillin. Achi abdul lishma. So because he holds, you have to use your verb, your mouth, to say something that is to make it asar. And finally, the Gemara asks the question. Who makes a burial shrouds after a person dies? Usually you make them before he died. So what's the difference? This case can never happen. You see, the whole point of Abai and Rava was only you have the dead body in front of you, it doesn't have clothing on, and you finish making a quick suit, and then you didn't wrap the body yet, but you said you're going to use it for this body. But how's that in Mitzias and in possibility? When could that happen? You have a dead body in front of you, and now you start weaving a cloth for the dead body. Usually, you prepare that before he's alive. Amalek going Shachvi to Harpanya. Harpanya was a very, very poor city, and those that died there, they didn't even have any. They probably didn't have clothing to wrap a dead body with. So therefore, they started it after the person died. Tarish Merema Rebbe says Hilchasa Kavas the halacha is like a baya that just by dedicating it becomes asa. Rabbanim Mama Hilchasa Kavas the Rava, that the halacha is like Rava. Hilchasa Kavas the Rava, the halacha is like Rava. So the Gemara just concluded it's a machlekes tanoim, and it's a machlekes who you paskin like. Okay, we'll stop over here.
Shkoyach, thank you.
Okay, a good night, everybody.
Good night.